Hey folks, welcome to today's video. Well, today I want to discuss the shelter that I built while I was out on Vancouver Island. I had two shelters. One was simply two cedar logs over a hollow in the ground, and then the next one, when I moved, I was able to build a little bit better shelter. But what I did on the inside of the shelter was very similar. So let me take you a look around. It's just a simple A-frame shelter. It's not really that big a deal, but I thought some of the things I did on the inside were pretty cool. Okay, well, this is not the same cordage that I had when I was out, and I would, if I only had bank line like what I'm using here, I would definitely beef this up a little bit more. This is just for demonstration purposes. I'm going to actually see how long it lasts out here. Some of the lashings are good, some of them are a little bit lacking. But anyway, on one end I had a tree, on the other hand I had a stump. I tried to replicate maybe the stump down there. I tied one end off on, obviously with the tree, I tied it off so it wouldn't lean frontwards or backwards. And then I put two bipods up. One in the front, one in the back. And then I just took a lot of different logs that I was able to find. The ones I was able to find were approximately this size right here. So not really sapling size, more starting to get to be towards a tree size. And this is kind of a little bit like what I was talking about in my safety video there a little bit, as far as lashings go. If you have the right cordage, and if you have enough cordage, a simple loop without a lot of frapping or anything, and just kind of tie it off in some half hinges will work just fine. These lashings here will work just fine. Sometimes what I'll do is, see, it's got a natural little bit of a ridge there. It's got a little knot or something. That'll help secure your branch there. Anyway, just a basic A-frame shelter. Before I put my tarp on this thing, what I did, and what you would need to do if you were going to use this type of a shelter, is you need to go along and either before you tie your logs up or afterwards, get rid of these little sharp sticks right here. I did it, if I remember right, I did it beforehand and afterwards, because sometimes you just don't see all of them. So I went along with my axe and just got rid of them, made them all smooth, because you don't want it to puncture your tarp, obviously. And the wind's blowing pretty good today, and I knew that it was going to blow out there, so I didn't want it to have any abrasion holes either. Not only, you know, sticks poking through, but anything that was just rough or real abrasive. I didn't want that against my tarp. So I'm going to get rid of some of the more obvious ones and then throw the tarp over. Nothing real earth-shattering yet. I did not show you the build. I did this build over the weekend. It was raining out. It took me a few hours. If you've never built a shelter like this by yourself and you're using decent size logs there, give it a whirl once. They don't go up quite as quick as what you might think. But anyway, I was able to measure my tarp with the angle of the bipod or the A-frame and how high I had put my ridge pole in order to determine whether it would work or not. And what I was able to do was I was able to take my tarp and fold the edges in like this. So along here would be a folded edge that I could store stuff on if I needed to. Now eventually the condensation did run down the inside of the tarp and did pool in some of the edges, but on the high ground edges I was able to store stuff quite dryly. And then all I did is I took the grommet and put a toggle through it and then just tied it to my bipod at both ends, each leg. Then at the front I had a big stump that blocked a lot of my wind, and I added to that stump with hemlock boughs. And in the back of my shelter, from my first location, I found a piece of poly that was all tore up and ripped and didn't look that great for a water catch or anything, so I kept it and packed it and covered the back end of my shelter with the plastic and then more boughs. And I took the tarp back off again just to make it easier to see on the inside of the shelter. I'll just talk a little bit about the bed that I made. The first location, like I said, it was just 2 cedar logs, a tarp over the top of it, and then that was basically it. I didn't use any cordage for my first shelter. I just carved stakes and tried to get them to go where they'd be able to go. I take that back. I did use a little bit of fishing line. I do remember I did use some fishing line, but I tried not to use too much. But I didn't have any found cordage at that location. So anyway, what I did is not much for the bed, okay? All I did is process some boughs. And processing boughs, I've said it before, those thin cedar or hemlock type boughs, you need a ton of them. And it just takes a long time and there's nothing you can do about it. You just need to sit there and make a bunch. I've done it here on my property where I've taken small twigs, laid them down as a base layer, and then a ton of swamp grass over the top of that, and it was a beautiful, beautiful mattress. I felt every stick that I left in that pile, and I tried to be pretty careful. So no twigs in it either. And I wanted it compressed at least this much. Is this ideal? No, this is ideal. But it takes time to do all this stuff. And by the time I found this shelter, you know, I'd been 3-4 days without food or so. So I mean, not this shelter, but my log shelter, the first decent shelter that I had, you know, I was at least a couple of days without food. This stuff takes time, and you know, it just takes time. It is what it is. But anyway, that's all I did for my first shelter's bed. Now my second shelter's bed, I was in an area, I hope you can hear me with this wind, it's just a really windy day out today, but anyway, I had a area that a bit of stuff washed up on the shore. Not quite as much as some of the other folks, but more than my first location, that's for sure. I found a good amount of rope, and I found a pallet, a wooden pallet. So what I did is I thought about what I should do with that pallet. Now obviously it's good fire starting material, it would be dry, but I wanted to see if I couldn't use it for something other than that. And what I came up with was breaking it apart and using it for my bed. So I tried to break apart the pallet in as many long sections, the boards, as long as possible, and then salvage the nails. So I was able to salvage quite a few nails and incorporated a few of them into my Paiute deadfall. But also I was able to smooth the ground out and lay planks down from that pallet to start with. And then after that, then I piled my boughs on top of that. So I figured that pallet gave me a little bit of levelness, you might say, and then also just a little bit of insulation between the ground and me. Not much, some pallet slats are pretty thin, but still better than nothing. Alright, one more thing to show and that's it. Alright, well this is what I did on the inside of my shelter. They gave us 2 tarps. I used the first one obviously for my main shelter. And then I created in here what I called a shelter within a shelter. I had my sleeping bag tucked in here. I had a log on each side. Their tarp was a little bit bigger than this one, so this one I still had room to put another log over here, or sometimes I'd put my pack or whatever just to keep it up out of the way. And then I could chill like this, and if I needed to, this was suspended. I found some pretty crappy cordage when I was out there. I think it was almost like weed eater twine. But I could raise this up or lower it down depending on the height of my tarp, and then this would prevent any of the condensation that was starting to happen quite readily from dripping on my sleeping bag. I just wanted an extra barrier between me and that crappy tarp that they gave us, because it wasn't that good of a tarp. And then when I wanted to get up in the morning, I just usually could prop this up there somewhere, And then I could get rid of this and just push my sleeping bag over. I always left this underneath my sleeping bag, but there was enough room in this tarp that I could actually cover my sleeping bag with it when I wasn't in there. And then that just afforded it a little more extra protection. Alright folks, I just thought I'd talk to you a little bit more about this little modification or whatever. Like I said, I called it a shelter within a shelter. Basically, it was just another water barrier between me and the soaking, rain-soaked area that I was in. But not only did it do that, it created a microclimate within a microclimate. Sure, I had to be careful of the condensation where my breath was, but if I was able to maneuver the tarp around so that just my face was out, once in a while I'd get a drip on my forehead from this tarp, but for the most part, if I was either able to push the tarp up out of my face so that I had a vent hole type thing, or if when it was closer, if I just stuck my head out, then the condensation wasn't too bad. And when it got really cold, I was able, these were big tarps now. I don't have them that big. I think the one was 20 by 20 and the other one was like 10 by 10. So I'm not 10 feet long, so at the very ends I was able to bunch it up. Now down by my feet I didn't worry about it too much, and actually my first shelter I actually had this secondary ridge line actually angled quite a bit, because if you can imagine, the two cedar logs were like this, right? And I was sleeping down here, so I had to make this other ridge pole almost mimic this ridge pole. So I had to scoot backwards in to get into my shelter, into my little shelter within the shelter. My secondary location, I did make it incline a little bit more because I did like that, and I could not really cover my feet, because if you cover your feet, it's gonna condensate there again. But I could block the other opening, and then when I was sleeping from my front area, I would build that tarp up, just a big billow. And actually what I did is I put my muck boots, I stood my muck boots straight up and down right in front of me, and then I put my tarp over the top of that, so it created a hill, and then plus the condensation wouldn't drip inside my boots. So, and you know, my knife, whatever I needed was inside that secondary shelter. My headlamp, you know, satellite phone if I needed that. Most of that stuff was right there on my Pelican case or whatever. But anyway, it just created a nice microclimate within a microclimate. Secondary moisture barrier. It gave me a moisture barrier between the ground and myself. I think it worked out pretty slick. It was, I mean, if you've got the tarps, rather than put that one as an awning or something like that, inside my shelter like that worked pretty darn good. Nothing too earth-shattering about the A-frame shelter. Like I said, I was kind of happy with the inside there with that secondary shelter, but the outside, just an A-frame. I tried the plow point early on. The plow point's my favorite type of shelter because I have wind protection on 3 sides for sure. And it sheds the rain real good. It usually sheds snow depending on the pitch of the roof you have. But even with a very inclined ridge pole, I was still getting a lot of condensation. Now on this flat one, I still got condensation. I tried to get rid of any little lumps in the ridge pole, you know, little knots on the bottom, so that when the water, it kind of sagged in the middle. So if it came across one of those little knots, it would usually drip right there. I could have inclined the ridge pole and made kind of a modified A-frame plow point type deal. I still think that the condensation would have came in, maybe not quite as bad, but with this method I had more room in there, and then with the secondary shelter the condensation wasn't as bad as it could have been. So I don't know, I think it worked out pretty good. Like I said, nothing earth-shattering, but it kind of just goes to show you that so long, I mean, if you've got a tight, sturdy, well-built shelter, it really doesn't matter the design. I mean, so long as you take your area into account for the design, there are multiple possibilities that will still work for your environment. One more thing I was going to say is like I said earlier with the bipod thing there, all I did was tie the grommets with toggles to the supports of the bipod. I did that on the front and the back. That was the only thing that I staked that tarp down with. I didn't stake it on the inside like how I said I folded the flaps in. There were no stakes in there. What I did is I just, like I said earlier, made sure that there were no little pokies that were poking that tarp. And then I took anything that was dead that I couldn't use, you know, sopping wet, and I leaned it up against the shelter so that when the wind blew it didn't billow a whole bunch. And the first storm or so I was able to tell where my weak points were. And all I did is pile some stuff up. You saw the pictures on, or you saw it on TV. I didn't put a lot of stuff on the outside, just enough just to make sure it wouldn't billow and that it wouldn't put a ton of pressure on the grommets. So front and back piled a bunch of boughs. I had kind of a movable door thing that I was working with. My stump in the very front had kind of a chimney thing that once I got her dialed in, it did draw smoke. Anyway, that's it. Hope you guys liked the video. Take care.